On March 14, 1838, a woman stepped into the sheriff's office in Natchez, Mississippi, carrying a confession that would linger like a curse in the minds of all who heard it. Her name was Abigail Turner. She had come to admit to murder, not one but 7. Sheriff Henry Dalton had been midway through his lunch when she appeared. Bread and cheese, wrapped by his wife that morning, lay forgotten on his desk. He was alone. His deputy had gone to settle a land dispute outside town. The office door opened without warning, without so much as a knock. Dalton looked up and felt his stomach tighten. The woman before him seemed almost unreal, as though she had slipped into existence rather than entered the room. She was painfully thin, her skin pale in the way of someone long denied sunlight. She wore a plain grey cotton dress, clean but frayed with age, the sort a house servant might own. Her hair was pulled back tightly, severe and exact. Nothing about her was out of place, except her eyes. They were not fearful, not sorrowful, not angry. They were vacant, 2 dark, depthless hollows that seemed to swallow light. Dalton froze, bread still in his hand, before slowly setting it aside and rising from his chair. "I need to confess," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like a clerk reciting names from a ledger. "I have murdered 7 people." Dalton had served as sheriff of Adams County for 15 years. He had dealt with thieves, drunks, and killers. He had witnessed hangings and stood over bodies still warm with violence. He believed himself hardened. Yet something about this woman, about the calm precision with which she spoke, made his skin crawl. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, his hand drifting toward the pistol hidden in his desk drawer, "you should sit down and tell me exactly what you mean." Without responding, she crossed the room. Her movement was strange, almost gliding, as if her feet barely touched the floor. She sat across from him, posture perfect, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her gaze remained fixed on nothing in particular. "My name is Abigail Turner," she began. What followed would consume Sheriff Dalton for the rest of his life. For 2 uninterrupted hours she spoke. She did not hesitate. She did not cry. She did not pause for breath. In calm, methodical detail, she described how she had poisoned an entire family over the course of 11 months. The Fairmont family was among the wealthiest plantation owners in the county, their cotton empire known throughout Mississippi. Their name carried influence, respect, and power. Abigail named each victim: Marcus Fairmont, the patriarch, 48 years old, his wife Catherine, 45, their children, Thomas, 29 and newly married, Jonathan, 27, Elizabeth, 24, and James, just 7 years old, and finally Sarah, Thomas's wife, 26, recently welcomed into the family estate. Abigail knew everything about them. She knew Marcus drank his coffee every morning at precisely 7 o'clock, with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. She knew Catherine suffered from chronic headaches and drank a particular tea before bed. She knew Thomas studied law late into the night, often eating leftovers in his father's study. She knew young James had a weakness for sweets and snuck into the kitchen when he thought no one was watching. And she knew exactly how each of them had died. "I began with very small amounts," she said calmly, "so small they barely noticed. A headache, a stomachache, nothing alarming. Just enough to start the process." "What process?" Dalton asked, his hand aching as he scribbled to keep up. "Gradual tolerance," Abigail replied, as if explaining a household task. "You introduce poison slowly, and the body adapts. Symptoms fade, even as the dosage increases. They believe they're recovering, when in truth the poison is becoming part of them, woven into their blood, their bones." She described how she gathered the substances. Some came from the surrounding woods, others from apothecaries, if one knew the right questions to ask. Roots dried and crushed into powders so fine they disappeared into liquids without trace. Pokeweed root, white snake root, oleander, water hemlock, autumn crocus, occasionally arsenic, taken from rat poison stored in the cellar, never too much, never too often, just enough. Too much of that and even the stupidest doctor will notice. The plant-based poisons are better. They mimic natural illnesses, stomach ailments, fevers, inflammation. Nothing that seems deliberately caused. Dalton felt sick listening to her. The detail was too specific, too knowledgeable, This wasn't the rambling of a mad woman. This was the testimony of someone who had studied her craft carefully and executed it with precision. "Why?" he asked, though he was afraid of the answer. "Why would you do this?" Abigail's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those empty eyes. Something that might have been pain or rage or grief so deep it had burned away everything else. "They did something unforgivable," she said simply, "and so have I." She continued with her confession, describing the pattern of illnesses that had plagued the Fairmont family for nearly a year. How each member had fallen sick multiple times, recovered, then fallen sick again. How the episodes had become more frequent as time went on. How Dr. Samuel Whitt, the family physician, had been baffled by the recurring symptoms. "He tested everything," Abigail said with something that might have been amusement in her voice. "The water, the food, the air quality. He never thought to test me." And then she described the final dinner, March 10th, 1838, a Sunday evening. She had prepared a special meal, roasted chicken with herb gravy, potatoes whipped with butter and cream, fresh spring vegetables from the garden, and for dessert, a peach cobbler that young James had specifically requested. "I put the final dose in the gravy," she said, "a concentration of everything I had been building in their systems for months, enough to finish what I had started." She described how they had eaten together in the dining room. The whole family gathered as they did every Sunday. How they had complimented the meal. How Marcus had asked for seconds of the gravy. How little James had eaten 3 servings of the cobbler. They retired to the sitting room afterward. Abigail continued, her voice still flat and mechanical. They sat together reading and talking, a perfect portrait of family contentment. I watched them from the doorway. I wanted to see the moment when they realized something was wrong. "And did they?" Dalton asked quietly. "No," Abigail said. "The poison worked too slowly for that. They felt tired, perhaps a little unwell, but nothing alarming. They went to bed at their usual times, and by morning they were dead. All of them." She described finding them the next day, Monday, March 11th. Marcus in his study, slumped over his desk, where he had apparently tried to work despite feeling ill. Catherine in their bed, one hand reaching toward the bell pull she had tried to ring for help. Thomas on the floor of his room halfway to the door. Jonathan in his bed curled on his side. Elizabeth at her vanity, her head resting on her folded arms. Sarah in the nursery where she had gone to check on James, and James himself in his small bed looking like he was simply sleeping. "I spent 2 days with them," Abigail said, and for the first time something like emotion entered her voice. "I washed their bodies. I dressed them in their best clothes. I folded their hands across their chests and closed their eyes. I sat with each one and told them why I had done it. Even though they couldn't hear me anymore, I told them." "What did you tell them?" Dalton asked, his own voice rough with horror. "The truth," Abigail said simply, "about what they had done, about what I had taken from them in return, about justice and revenge, and whether there's any real difference between the two." She had cleaned the house methodically, she said. She had disposed of the poison bottles, washed every surface that might have held residue, eliminated any trace of her crime. She had done it carefully, professionally, with the same meticulous attention to detail she had used in the poisoning itself. "And then I came here," she finished, "because I wanted someone to know. I wanted it recorded. I wanted there to be a witness to what I had done, even if no one could prove it." Sheriff Dalton stared at her across his desk, trying to process what he had just heard. It was one of the most detailed, disturbing confessions he had ever taken. It was also, he was about to discover, completely impossible, because when he sent his deputies to the Fairmont estate that afternoon, they found the family alive. All of them, healthy, breathing, bewildered by the accusatio. There were no bodies, no deaths, no crime. Just a woman with empty eyes who insisted with absolute certainty that she had killed 7 people who were very much alive. The Fairmont Plantation sat on 300 acres of prime cotton land just outside Natchez, overlooking the Mississippi River. The main house was a Greek Revival mansion, white columns and wide verandas, the kind of ostentatious display of wealth that was common among the planter class in the 1830s. Sheriff Dalton had visited the estate several times over the years, always on social occasions. Marcus Fairmont was a prominent member of the community, serving on the church board and the county council. His wife, Catherine, was known for hosting elaborate dinner parties. The family was by all appearances respectable and well regarded, which made Abigail Turner's confession all the more disturbing. Dalton rode out to the estate with two of his deputies, Tom Crawford and Billy Mason, both young men who had been with him less than a year. They had listened to Abigail's confession with growing alarm and now seemed eager to see what they would find. "You really think she killed them all, Sheriff?" Tom asked as they approached the estate's long oak-lined drive. "I think she believes she did," Dalton replied carefully. "Whether she actually did? Well, we're about to find out." The house looked peaceful in the late afternoon sun, its windows glowing with lamplight. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Everything appeared normal, undisturbed, not at all like a house where 7 people had been murdered 3 days earlier. Dalton dismounted and approached the front door with a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong here, though, he couldn't articulate what. It wasn't that the house looked too normal. It was something else, something in the quality of the light or the air, or the way the shadows fell across the veranda. He knocked, and after a moment the door opened. Marcus Fairmont stood there alive and apparently well, holding a glass of whiskey in one hand and looking annoyed at the interruption. "Henry," he said, recognizing the sheriff, "what brings you out here at this hour?" Dalton felt his stomach drop. He had hoped, though he hadn't articulated this hope even to himself, that Abigail had been telling the truth, that they would find bodies, evidence, something concrete, because if she had been telling the truth, at least it made sense, a terrible, horrific sense, but sense nonetheless. But this, a living, breathing Marcus Fairmont, irritated at being disturbed during his evening drink, this made no sense at all. "Mr. Fairmont," Dalton said carefully, "I need to speak with you and your family, all of them. It's urgent." Marcus frowned but stepped back to let them in. "Very well, though I can't imagine what would require disturbing us at dinner time." The entry hall was grand. Polished wood floors, a crystal chandelier, a curved staircase leading to the upper floors. Through an open doorway Dalton could see into the dining room where the family was indeed gathered for their evening meal. Catherine Fairmont sat at one end of the long table, elegant in a deep green dress, a slight frown on her face at the interruption. The children were arranged along the sides, Thomas and his wife Sarah sitting together, Jonathan across from them, Elizabeth next to her mother, and young James at the other end, still wearing a napkin tucked into his collar. All of them alive, all of them healthy, all of them staring at the sheriff and his deputies with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "Sheriff Dalton," Catherine said, rising from her seat, "has something happened? Is there trouble in town?" Dalton removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "How did you ask a family if they were actually dead? How did you explain that someone had confessed to murdering them in meticulous detail, describing their deaths with such specificity that you could see it happening as she spoke?" "Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. I need to ask you all some questions about a member of your household staff." "Our staff?" Marcus's frown deepened. "Which one?" "A woman named Abigail Turner." The change in the room was immediate and palpable. Every member of the Fairmont family went still, their faces shifting through a series of expressions, surprise, recognition, and then something else, something that looked like fear or guilt, or perhaps both at once. It was Catherine who spoke first, her voice tight. "That woman no longer works here. When did she leave your employment?" "2 days ago," Marcus said, his earlier annoyance replaced by something harder, more guarded. "We dismissed her for theft." "What did she steal?" Marcus exchanged a glance with his wife. "Money from the household accounts, some jewelry. We confronted her about it and she simply left. Didn't defend herself, didn't apologize, just walked out." This didn't match Abigail's story at all. She had said nothing about being dismissed or accused of theft. According to her timeline, she had served the poisoned dinner on March 10th and remained in the house for 2 days afterward alone with the bodies. "Mr. Fairmont, I need to know, has anyone in your family been ill recently in the past year?" The silence that followed this question was heavy and strange. The family members looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Why do you ask?" Catherine said carefully. "Please just answer the question, ma'am." Thomas spoke up from his place at the table. We've all had episodes, stomach ailments, fevers, nothing serious but recurring. Dr. Hewitt has treated us multiple times. When was the most recent episode? I was sick 2 days ago, Thomas said. March 12th. But I recovered by evening. March 12th. The day after Abigail claimed they had all died. The day she said she had spent alone in the house with their bodies. And the rest of you? Dalton pressed. Have any of you been ill since then? They all shook their heads. Dalton took a deep breath. Mr. Fairmont, Mrs. Fairmont, I need to inform you that Abigail Turner walked into my office this morning and confessed to poisoning your entire family. She described in detail how she had been systematically introducing toxins into your food for nearly a year. She claimed that she served a final lethal dose on March 10th and that all of you died by the morning of the 11th. The reaction to this statement was not what Dalton expected. They didn't laugh, didn't express outrage or disbelief. Instead, the fear he had glimpsed earlier became more pronounced. Catherine put a hand to her throat. Elizabeth made a small sound that might have been a sob. Young James looked confused and frightened, glancing between his parents as if seeking guidance. That's insane, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. We're clearly alive, Sheriff. Whatever fantasies that woman has concocted. She wasn't raving, Dalton interrupted. She was calm, detailed, specific. She knew things about your family, about your habits and routines that only someone who had worked in your household would know. She knew about your illnesses, the symptoms, the timing. She described exactly what she used and how she administered it. We're alive, Marcus repeated. But now he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as the sheriff. She clearly didn't succeed in whatever she attempted. Did she attempt something? Then you're acknowledging that she may have actually tried to poison you. No, Catherine said quickly. Too quickly. We're saying no such thing. The woman is clearly deranged. You only have to look at her to see that something is wrong with her. What do you mean? Dalton asked. Catherine struggled to articulate it. Her eyes, the way she moves, the way she watches people. There's something not right about her. We never should have hired her. Why did you hire her? Dalton asked. Where did she come from? Marcus and Catherine exchanged another one of those loaded glances. She presented herself with references, Marcus said finally. From a family in Louisiana, the Beaumonts. She seemed capable, and we needed additional household help. Do you still have those references? They would have been filed with our household records. I can have our clerk locate them if necessary. But Dalton noticed the hesitation. The way Marcus's eyes shifted slightly when he mentioned the references, he was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. I'd like to see them, Dalton said. And I'd like to speak with your other household staff, anyone who worked closely with Abigail Turner. Sheriff, Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge of authority. I appreciate your diligence in investigating this matter, but as you can plainly see, we are all alive and well. Whatever claims this woman has made are clearly the product of a disturbed mind. I failed to see why you need to disrupt our household further. Because something happened here, Dalton said quietly. Something that prompted her to walk into my office and confess to 7 murders. And I intend to find out what it was. Marcus's expression hardened. Are you accusing us of something, Sheriff? I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm investigating a confession. That's my job. Your job is to maintain order in this county, Marcus said coldly, not to harass respected families based on the ravings of a clearly insane servant. Now, if you'll excuse us, our dinner is getting cold. It was a dismissal, clear and firm, and technically Marcus was right. Dalton had no legal grounds to push further. The supposed victims were alive and unwilling to cooperate. There was no crime to investigate. But as Dalton and his deputies left the estate, riding back toward town in the gathering darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something deeply wrong. Not in Abigail's confession, but in the Fairmonts' reaction to it. They were alive. So why did they seem so afraid? Back at his office, Dalton found Abigail Turner exactly where he had left her, sitting in the holding cell with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall with those unsettling empty eyes. She didn't react when he approached, and then turned to look at him. didn't acknowledge his presence in any way. She simply continued staring at that same spot on the wall, as if she could see something there that he couldn't. "Abigail," Dalton said carefully, "I went to the Fairmont estate." "I know," she said, her voice flat. "They're alive, all of them." "I know," she repeated. Dalton pulled up a chair and sat down outside the cell bars, studying her profile. "So you lied to me. You didn't kill them." "No," Abigail said calmly. "I didn't lie. I told you exactly what I did. You just misunderstood what it meant. Explain it to me then." For the first time since he'd returned, Abigail turned to look at him, her empty eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. "I poisoned them," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "I introduced toxins into their systems over the course of 11 months. I built up concentrations in their organs, their blood, their bones. I made the poison part of them, inseparable from their own flesh. That part is true. That part happened exactly as I described. But they're not dead." "Not yet," Abigail agreed. "Death isn't always immediate, Sheriff. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's planted like a seed and takes years to grow. I killed them. The dying just hasn't finished yet." The words sent a chill down Dalton's spine. "You're saying you poisoned them, but not lethally, that they're going to die eventually from what you did." "Everyone dies eventually," Abigail said. "I just determined how and when." "That's insane. You can't predict when someone will die, can I?" Abigail tilted her head slightly like a bird studying an insect. "Tell me, Sheriff, do you know what happens when you feed someone small amounts of toxins over a long period of time? You build up their tolerance. You just said that yourself." "Yes, but there's more to it than that. The toxins accumulate in the body. They settle into the organs, the bones, the brain. They alter the way the body functions at a fundamental level. A person might seem healthy, might even feel healthy, but they're carrying death inside them. And eventually, years, sometimes decades later, that accumulated damage manifests." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "Marcus Fairmont has an irregular heartbeat now, though he probably doesn't know it yet. The arsenic I fed him has settled into his heart muscle. Give it time, 20, maybe 30 years, and it will kill him. They'll call it heart failure, natural causes, but it will be murder." "You can't possibly know that," Dalton protested. "Catherine has toxins in her brain," Abigail continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Water hemlock compounds that cross the blood barrier. She'll start having episodes in a few years. Paranoia, hallucinations, violent mood swings. They'll call her mad, they'll lock her away, but it will be the poison I put in her working slowly to destroy her mind." "Stop," Dalton said. But Abigail kept talking, her voice never changing in pitch or tone. "Thomas has nerve damage from the pokey. It will progress. His muscles will waste away. He'll be crippled before he's 35. Jonathan has cellular damage that will manifest as tumors. Elizabeth has been dosed with so much autumn crocus that she's lost the ability to feel properly. Physical sensation, emotional response, all of it muted and fading. Sarah will never carry a child to term. The things I fed her have damaged her womb beyond repair. And young James." She paused, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed her face. Not regret exactly, but perhaps a distant acknowledgement of something lost. "James was the hardest," she said softly. "He's just a child, but he's also a Fairmont, and the poison doesn't discriminate. He'll live long, longer than the others, but his life will be marked by suffering, chronic illness, early aging, the death of his own children. The toxins are in his blood now, and when he has children, they'll inherit trace amounts. The Fairmont line will wither slowly, generation by generation, until it disappears entirely." Dalton felt sick, not because he believed her. The claims were too outlandish, too much like something from a Gothic novel, but because of the certainty with which she spoke, the absolute conviction that what she was describing would come to pass. "This is madness," he said. "Even if you did poison them, even if everything you're saying is true, you can't predict the future. You don't know what will happen to them, don't I?" Abigail smiled, and it was the most disturbing expression Dalton had ever seen on a human face. "I've studied poisons for years, Sheriff. I know exactly what each substance does, how it accumulates, how it manifests over time. I didn't choose randomly. James married twice. Both wives died young. He had 5 children. 3 died in infancy, 2 in early childhood. The Fairmont line, once so proud and extensive, dwindled to just James himself. He developed chronic health problems in his 42nds, respiratory issues, digestive problems, joint pain that no doctor could adequately explain or treat. He aged premature, Ely, looking 70 when he was barely 50. It's like his body is just wearing out, Dr. Hewitt told Dalton. Hewitt himself was quite old by then, nearing retirement, but he still kept track of the Fairmonts with the fascination of a man who suspects he's witnessing something extraordinary. Wearing out, Hewitt continued, or like it's carrying some fundamental damage that gets worse with each generation. Those children of his who survived to birth, they all had health problems from the start. Weak constitutions, frequent illnesses, failure to thrive. It's as if something in his blood is poisoning them. You're saying the effects are hereditary? I'm saying I've never seen anything like it. If Abigail Turner really did what she claimed, if she introduced toxins that accumulated in James's system when he was just a child, then yes, it's theoretically possible that trace amounts could be passed to his offspring through his blood. The science isn't clear on such things, but Hewitt trailed off, shaking his head. James Fairmont died in 1891 at 60, having outlived his entire family. The estate was sold to pay his debts. The grand house was eventually torn down. The cotton fields were divided and sold off. Of the Fairmont family that had once been so prominent in Natchez society, nothing remained except a few graves in the town cemetery in Dalton's journal, documenting their slow destruction over 50 years. Sheriff Henry Dalton retired in 1873 after 38 years of service. He was 75 years old, his mind still sharp, but his body finally admitting its age. He moved to a small house on the edge of Natchez and spent his remaining years doing what he had done since 1838, documenting the Abigail Turner Us. His journal had grown to 3 volumes by then, filled with meticulous notes about the Fairmonts' deaths, medical records, what he could reconstruct or obtain, testimonies from people who had known the family, and his own observations about the uncanny accuracy of Abigail's predictions. He also recorded the rumors that persisted about Abigail herself, sightings of a woman matching her description, thin with empty eyes, appearing in various places throughout Mississippi and Louisiana over the decades. Always brief glimpses, never confirmed but eerily consistent. In 1875, one such rumor caught his attention. A woman had been seen at the Natchez Cemetery standing beside the plot where Hannah was buried. The gravestone, the simple marker that had mysteriously appeared in the 1840s, had been cleaned, the weeds around it cleared away. Dalton went to investigate. The grave was indeed freshly tended, the stone scrubbed clean so that Hannah's name stood out clearly, and beside the grave someone had planted flowers, wild ones, the kind that grew in the woods around Natchez, the kind Hannah might have picked herself when she was alive. There was no note, no sign of who had done it, but Dalton knew. He sat on the ground beside Hannah's grave, his old bones protesting the movement, and looked at the simple stone. "She remembered you," he said softly to the dead girl buried there. "She came back, and she made them pay, and she never forgot you. I hope that matters. I hope you can rest now." He stayed there for a long time thinking about justice and revenge, about crimes that go unpunished and retribution that can't be proven, about a woman who had confessed to a murder that took 50 years to complete and might never be officially recognized as murder at all. When he finally stood to leave, his knees aching, he noticed something tucked against the base of Hannah's headstone. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn, as if it had been carried for a very long time. With trembling hands, Dalton picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, the same meticulous script from Abigail's original confession in 1838. "Sheriff Dalton, if you're reading this, then you remembered. You kept the record. You didn't let them bury the truth along with the bodies. Thank you for that. You probably have many questions. I'll answer the ones I can. Yes, I poisoned them. Every word of my confession was true, though not in the way you initially understood. I introduced toxins into their systems slowly, methodically, building a foundation of damage that would manifest over years. I made their deaths part of their bodies, inseparable from their own flesh and blood. Why confess before they were dead? Because I wanted someone to know. I wanted a record to exist before the Fairmonts could erase it. I knew they would try stealing your files, dismissing witnesses, making everything disappear. But I also knew you would remember. I saw it in your eyes that first day. You were a man who wouldn't let go of truth once he'd recognized it. The commitment to the asylum was expected. I allowed it to happen because I needed to disappear for a while to let the process I'd started run its course without interference. The escape was simple. I'd observed the routines, noted the weaknesses. No institution is as secure as it believes itself to be. I've spent these decades watching from a distance, documenting the effects just as you have, making sure each death matched my predictions, making sure the Fairmonts understood in their final moments what had been done to them and why. Marcus knew at the end. I visited him 3 days before he died, walked right into his study, the same study where Hannah used to clean, where he used her before discarding her. He recognized me immediately, even after 30 years. I told him that Hannah's death was finally catching up to him, that the poison I'd fed him so carefully was about to stop his heart. He tried to call for help, but I'd made sure we wouldn't be interrupted. "Did she suffer?" he asked me. "Hannah, did she suffer?" "Yes," I told him. "She suffered more than you can imagine, and now you understand how that feels." He died 3 days later, clutching at his chest, probably wondering if every pain was the poison finally finishing its work. Was it the poison that killed him, or his own fear and guilt? Does it matter? He died either way, and he died knowing why. I visited each of them before the end, told them about Hannah, reminded them of what they did to her, and what I did to them in return. Let them die with that knowledge, with the understanding that they never escaped, that justice, even if no law recognized it, had been served. James is the last. I'll wait for him to die naturally, as he suffered enough simply by living. And then my work will be done. The Fairmont line will be extinct, destroyed as thoroughly as they destroyed Hannah. You might wonder if I regret it, if I think what I did was right. The answer is complicated. I don't regret avenging my sister. She deserved someone to fight for her to make her death mat. But I also destroyed 7 people, including a child. I took James's childhood, condemned him to a life of suffering for crimes he was too young to have committed or prevented. That weighs on me. It always will. But I would do it again because some crimes are so terrible that they demand terrible retribution because the law failed Hannah utterly, and someone had to provide the justice it couldn't. You documented everything. You kept the record. That makes you part of this story too, Sheriff. Part of the judgment against the Fairmonts, and part of the testimony that Hannah's life mattered, that her death wasn't meaningless. Thank you for that service. Thank you for remembering when everyone else forgot. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Truly gone. Not just disappeared. I'm old now and tired and ready to rest. I've done what I set out to do. Hannah has been avenged. The truth has been preserved. I hope that's enough. I hope she would think it was enough. I hope somewhere she's at peace now. Abigail Turner. Dalton read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his weathered face. Then he carefully folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket next to Ruth's letter, which he still carried after all these years. He had his answer. Not the answer a court of law would accept, but the truth nonetheless. Abigail Turner had committed murder. Slow, calculated, methodical murder that took 50 years to complete. She had poisoned 7 people, destroyed a family line, and never faced legal consequences for her actions. But she had also delivered justice for a girl whose abuse and death would otherwise have been forgotten. She had made sure Hannah's life mattered, that her death wasn't swept under the rug of polite society's desire to protect the powerful and ignore the powerless. Was it justice or murder? Dalton still didn't know. Maybe it was both. Maybe some acts exist in the space between law and morality, where the answer depends on which lens you look through. He walked home slowly, feeling every one of his 77 years. When he reached his house, he added Abigail's final letter to his journal, writing a note beneath it. This is the truth, all of it. What anyone does with this knowledge, I leave to their conscience and judgment. I'm too old and too weary to carry it any longer. Hannah existed. She suffered. She died unjustly. Abigail existed. She remembered. She took revenge. The Fairmonts existed. They committed crimes. They paid for them eventually, though no court ever judged them guilty. These things happened. This is true. Whether it was right or wrong, I cannot say. I'm just a sheriff who tried to document a crime that existed outside the bounds of law in the space where morality and revenge and justice all blur together. Let history judge. I'm done. Sheriff Henry Dalton, 1875. Sheriff Henry Dalton died in 1876 at 78. His daughter, sorting through his possessions, found the 3 volumes of journal entries about the Abigail Turner case. She read them with growing horror and fascination. She considered burning them. The story was too dark, too disturbing, too likely to damage her father's reputation as a respected lawman. People would think he'd become obsessed, perhaps even delusional, spending decades documenting what amounted to an elaborate theory based on the confessions of a mad woman. But she didn't burn them. Something about the meticulous detail, the careful documentation, the obvious dedication her father had brought to preserving the truth. It convinced her that the journals mattered, that they should be preserved, even if no one believed them. She donated them to the Mississippi Historical Society with a note explaining that they were her father's records of a case he had worked on, and that she believed they should be kept for historical purposes, even if the events described seemed unlikely. The journals sat in the Society's archives for decades, occasionally examined by researchers interested in 19th-century law enforcement or medical history. Most dismissed Dalton's conclusions as the obsession of a man who had let one strange case consume him. The story of Abigail Turner and the Fairmont family became a footnote in regional history, an interesting example of how even experienced lawmen could be misled by a compelling criminal. But the records exist, all of it. Abigail's confession, Dalton's investigation, Ruth's testimony, the medical records, the timeline of deaths matching Abigail's predictions with eerie precision, Abigail's final letter explaining it all. The Fairmont family is gone, their line extinct, their estate dissolved, their graves in the Natchez Cemetery are visited by no one. Most people in the region have forgotten they ever existed. But Hannah's grave remains. Her simple marker, Hannah, died April 3, 1837. The plot still stands, cared for by the Historical Society after ownership reverted to the county. It features on local tours, though most guides know only fragments of its story. They speak of servant burial practices in the antebellum South, a footnote in history. But they never speak of Hannah. They never mention Abigail Turner's decades-long campaign of retribution. They don't speak of the 7 deaths that followed from that single act, deaths linked by threads of poison and vengeance too subtle for any court to trace. Some truths are too complex, too morally tangled, too uncomfortable to fit neatly into a guidebook or a plaque. Yet Sheriff Dalton's journals preserve everything. 3 volumes of meticulous entries lie in an archive in Jackson, waiting for anyone willing to sift through them, to uncover the story hidden in the shadows of history, the story of a woman who confessed to a crime that unfolded over half a century, a crime that was also justice, or justice that became a crime, depending on the angle from which you viewed it. The story of Hannah, who deserved more than the fate she received, and the story of Abigail, who made certain her sister's death would never be forgotten, no matter the cost. Whether one believes Abigail Turner truly poisoned the Fairmonts over decades, or views it as coincidence, delusion, or self-fulfilling prophecy, the records endure. The deaths occurred. The timeline aligns. Her predictions came true. And somewhere within those facts lies a truth no one has fully explained. Was it poison in their veins or poison in their consciences? Guilt and fear manifesting as illness? Murder or justice enacted through channels the law could not recognize? Was Abigail Turner a killer or an avenger? The question remains unanswered, preserved across 3 volumes of journal entries, in the empty graves at the Fairmont estate, and in the lone marker for a girl named Hannah, whose death mattered to exactly 1 p. Arson. Perhaps that was Abigail's intention all along, to leave behind a question that could never be fully resolved, a confession both entirely true and utterly unprovable, a crime suspended in the liminal space between law and morality, where justice and murder blur into one, and in that impossible space something happened, something that destroyed a family over 50 years, set in motion by 7 methodical doses of poison and a single unyielding conviction that some wrongs demand terrible retribution. Whether it unfolded exactly as Abigail described, or whether it was a chain of coincidences too uncanny to dismiss, we may never know. But the Fairmonts are dead, all of them, just as she foretold. That fact endures, recorded and undeniable, waiting in an archive for anyone brave enough to confront what it might